So we're super fortunate tonight because Philip and I don't have to speak. That's number one. Number two is we have Russ here, who is the vice president of Point Mortgage. And Point Mortgage currently is in how many states?
26.
26, and soon to be?
27.
27, okay. So Russ is on our morning Zooms every single day. He is extraordinarily knowledgeable about forecasting and the market and everything that's going on. And then this guy, Steve Games, sold his company to Warren Buffett. And that was Prudential, California, which is now Berkshire Hathaway. And Steve is a legend, seriously a legend in the United States in real estate, as well as Southern California. There's no one that has more experience than this guy right here. And he's the president of our company. He could have retired, right? But he decided, why not come to Coldwell Banker West and be a part of our team? So we're very fortunate to have you guys. And if you have any questions about anything, these guys are going to chit-chat about it.
Yeah, ask along the way. Just a conversation.
And we really appreciate you guys being here on a rainy, rainy day.
If you speak to a crowd of 10 or 11,000 people, it's really bad to say interrupt at any time you'd like. But with this group, I think we can handle it. So let me preface what we're doing here. One, we're talking to an audience, certainly on the internet, but to you guys who are kind enough to show up, it's so much easier to talk freely when somebody's in front of you than when you have no audience, a real person in the audience. So I do want to tell you that when we talk about experience, experience does have value. And I think a lot of times it seems like it's only what's going to happen tomorrow or what happened yesterday that matters. It's actually a combination of all of that plus history. And so history does repeat itself. I've been in the residential real estate business for 52 years. So I started right after the Vietnam War, and I started selling real estate in Southern California, particularly in the East County of San Diego. And a typical house, in those days, I was selling it to sailors because I had a passion for service people at the time, just coming back from the war. And I sold $12,000 single-family houses to sailors in East County on Dictionary Hill. Anybody ever been to Dictionary Hill?
Nope.
Many times.
If you haven't, it's an experience. Dictionary Hill was actually the least expensive place in San Diego to buy in the late or early 70s because the way that people bought property in Dictionary Hill was they bought a dictionary in New York. And if they bought a dictionary in New York, they got given a lot in California as a part of buying the encyclopedia or the dictionary.
Could you imagine?
Could
you imagine?
Yeah. So I actually had to call people and tell them, look, I'm looking for properties in San Diego, and I noticed you own a piece of property in San Diego. Would you be interested in selling it? And the answer was always, what piece of property? They had no idea that they owned it, and it had been properly deeded to them. And typically it was a second or third generation person. When I told them, look, I think I can get you $2,500 for your lot, it was like literally pennies from heaven. It was money falling out of the sky. So with that kind of background, I did the least expensive sale in San Diego County 52 years ago for $12,000. And I've also sold the 25, 30, 35, $40 million properties all over Southern California in years to come. So I've got a lot of background. Russ worked in one of my companies as early as 1994. And so we're very familiar with each other. We'll sound familiar when we talk and correct each other and interrupt each other. So
and joke a little bit too.
Yeah. So we believe that any knowledge that you can get from us or any questions that you can ask It would be viable, not just in the real estate business, but in what's happening in the economy, where you're going, where you might want to go, any of those kinds of questions. We're at least willing to give you our opinion. And, opinions aren't very valuable, but I do. No one, let's see, maybe you will remember, and maybe you've seen it in later, long after it was a famous movie, but there was a movie called The Graduate. In the movie called The Graduate, which I recommend you see if you haven't, young man is graduating from USC, I think, or one of the Southern California universities, and he's going to a party, a graduation party at his family's house, and a guy gets him aside and he says, look, there's only one word I want you to remember, you need to know it right now, it's your future. And the graduate says several times, what would that word be? And he looks at him and he says, plastics. And that's the word of the day. And the movie won the Academy Awards and was famous and so forth. And you have to watch it to understand what plastics is, but what is the word of the real estate market today? And I'm going to say that it's a single word, and it's going to kind of thread through everything we say this evening. It's circumstance. So the reason I use the word circumstance is because both from a mortgage standpoint, from a purchasing standpoint, from a property standpoint, from real estate, it's not the market that's driven by interest rates. It's not the market that's driven by scarcity. It's not the market that's driven by any of those things. It's always driven by the client's circumstance. And that's why there's always clients. You see, today there's a client who has a better opportunity to buy or a better opportunity to sell than ever before, and the market is saying, no, this is the wrong time. So circumstance changes everything. And individual circumstance is probably what has made us in the real estate business successful year after year. And when the market fell off, we didn't. And we didn't fall off because there were people with circumstances that gave them better opportunity than any other time. And that opportunity exists today. So we're going to talk a little bit about that, what a buyer should be thinking, what a seller should be thinking, and what your individual circumstance may be, or somebody's circumstance that you know. So is it the right time to buy? Is it the right time to sell? And I have seen graphs for the last 50 years that show the market going up, and they show it as a straight line. They show the market going down, and they show it as a straight line. It shows the market standing still, and they show it as a straight line. There is, if nothing else that you can take from this presentation tonight, there is no such thing as a straight line market. It does not exist. There's ups and downs, there's jags that go up. Why did my neighbor sell the house for more last month, right, than somebody did 4 months ago, while the market is, for all intents and purposes, declining? So we'd like to answer some of those questions.
And it's interesting you said declining, because the media, you guys watch the news, you hear declining real estate market, and what most people think is that the values are coming down. In reality, it's the amount of sales that are switching, right?
Yeah.
So you're having less units being sold, yet values haven't come down. And I think one of the unfortunate perceptions that the media kind of does is it's always negative news. It's very rarely positive news, but when you really dive into the numbers and we'll do that, you can see that it's actually very optimistic going forward, especially in the first half of this year.
You know, I think it's interesting. I would visit my father as he was aging, and he was 92, and I'd stop in to see him, and he kept reading newspapers. You know, newspapers were a part of his life for years and years. He kept reading newspapers, and I'd stop to see him, and he'd bombard me at the door, literally, with 5 or 6 horrible things that had just happened. You know, this has gone wrong, that's gone wrong, how are you going to survive? I'd hate to be your age now, all of that kind of stuff. And I finally told him, I said, look, I'm not going to come here anymore unless you read past the front page. So if you have family, if you have an attitude, if you're watching the news, if you're watching it on your phone, if you're reading it in the newspaper, if you're taking it from a million different sources today, read past the front page, because there's a lot of good news occurring. There's a huge change in real estate in San Diego County right now. And people are going to miss it because they've been told that now's not the time to be involved in real estate. So we're going to answer a lot of questions at the end. So make sure we don't talk too long.
Yep.
I'd like to kind of start with Russ as a person who can address what's actually happening with finance and with interest rates and with mortgages, and where he thinks they're going, where the market thinks they're going, and how high are they really, and is it still affordable to buy a house?
Let's do that.
Yeah.
You guys want to talk about interest rates? Big factor in buying a house, right?
Yeah.
And have they gone up? Yes. They went up to roughly 7% at the end of last year. They were down in 2s and 3s, a year and a half ago. So have they gone up? Yes. What's been the catalyst of that cause? It's a couple things. One's inflation. So all this year ago, grocery shopping, we see that prices have gone up, fuel costs have gone up. We had this
Terrific understatement there.
Yes. Well, I drove over here and had gas in the car. We had this period of time during COVID where the Federal Reserve that is currently in place right now was trying to keep the economy going and stimulating it, right? And they did this thing called quantitative easing, and it went roughly about a period of a year and a half, and then we started seeing inflation in it. And the thought was that it was transitory. Turns out it wasn't. So we missed the boat probably by 6 months of what should have been Fed rate hikes. We've gone beyond that now, and the one thing that I've kind of figured out about this Fed, and if you guys follow it a little bit, they tend to be very aggressive, one way or another, right? They start moving and they go all guns a-blazing, which is what they've done with the Fed funds rate. And the Fed funds rate has gone up. A lot of people think that that's what affects mortgages. It actually doesn't. What affects mortgages is because a mortgage is a very long-term investment. If you think about it, most mortgages are 30 years long. So if I'm investing for 30 years, the biggest enemy to a mortgage is actually inflation. Fed funds rate is simply the overnight lending rate that a bank will loan to another bank. Very short term. Overnight is 24 hours compared to 30 years. What has been happening is when you have that inflation, so as inflation's deteriorating an investment in a mortgage, if inflation's at 8%, do I really want to loan someone something at 4%? No, my buying power goes down over time. So as long as we have inflation sitting there, you're going to have higher mortgage rates. At the same time, you've had this inversion that's been happening between the 10-year and 3-year, along with foreign entities not buying mortgage-backed securities because, again, it's at the price that they're at. I believe that we are probably, if we're not already in one, at the cusp of a recession. Maybe we're in one, maybe we aren't. If we go into recession, every single time in history, mortgage rates have gone down, every time. We also have this inversion that I talked about a second ago, and an inversion means a longer-term debt is actually paying less than a shorter-term debt. Usually it's the other way around, right? If I'm loaning money out for 10 years to someone, I'm going to get a higher rate of return than if I'm only loaning it out for 3 months. Right now, the T-bills are inverted. That is almost a sure sign of a recession too, as a recession indicator. Every time rates go down, so when there's a recession. Secondly, you've had some anomalies in there as far as servicing of loans go. So typically, you'll see servicing cost about 2% to 1.75% of a mortgage. So example, if I have a mortgage rate at 4.75%, probably 1.75% of that when I took my mortgage out was based on servicing. And when you're a loan servicer, you make your revenue stream over a period of time, right? The average loan in America's kept about 7 years, 7 years. So if rates are in the 7s, as a servicer, I know, wait a minute, they aren't going to stay in the 7s. They do economic forecasting as well, and they believe rates are going down. So instead of asking for 1.75 or 2%, they've been asking for 3. So rates are a little artificially higher because of that. Near the end of last year, we saw that change a little bit and start to come down, and that's starting to slide down as well. So the prediction on rates, quickly, is about 5% probably at the end of the first half. So within the next 5 months or so, we'll see that gradually going up.
Is a 5% rate affordable?
It is affordable, and here's what's interesting also. You know, we've had some sticker shock going on with home buyers. So you know, you had been used to seeing 4 or 5% rates, and all of a sudden 7 shows up. That's a big difference in someone's cash flow when they're buying a property, compounded with we talked about a little earlier, inflation. Right, everything's costing more money. So you have people that normally would think, okay, I'm going to go out and look at houses and maybe buy one. They have a little sticker shock. They've kind of gone into hibernation, tapped the brakes a little bit to see what will happen. Interestingly enough, if you look at payroll and how much people are making, over the last year, on average, 9% more income this year than the year prior. Interestingly, when you look at ADP, who's the largest payroll company in the nation, they do write more paychecks than anybody else. When you dive into it, it looked like about 7% is the average of an income increase for someone that stayed with their job. If you switch jobs and were a job switcher, you know, went from one job to another, you went up about 17%.
Wow.
So if you take into the fact that, okay, if my income, for sake of argument, was $10,000 a month, and it went up on average 9%, now I'm at $10,900. That really can help offset the extra cost of a mortgage. Like if we didn't have inflation everywhere else, it does offset it.
Yeah.
100%. Costs you no more of a feeling. Yes, it costs you more in dollars, but as a percentage, it doesn't cost you anymore. What's happened is we've had that other inflation that's there. As that inflation gets under control, that affordability you were just talking about, it'll be back. Compounded with mortgage rates going down, right? They've already started to come down. If they go down into the 5s, it's even more affordable.
And Russ, what's the highest you've ever seen a mortgage rate?
When I started in the business, 11%. But I opened up a desk drawer and it had 22 on a desk drawer.
And we sold property through the 21%. The highest mortgage I ever saw was 21%. And we continue to sell property because of opportunity and because of circumstance. So how many of you have heard that everybody is leaving California? Right? It didn't seem like that on the way here tonight, did it?
No, it did not.
No. So everybody's since I came into real estate business in 1971, everybody's been leaving California. You know, it was the government, it was this, it was taxes, it was too expensive, it was all of those things. There are still more people today, right now, coming into California than have ever left.
We have 4 of them sitting right here.
Yeah, so
that within the last
this
year,
idea that the market is going to crash because everybody's going to want to live in Denver.
Texas.
So my daughter came to me and said, Dad, you're helping me buy a house. We can buy twice as much house in Denver as we can buy here. I said, and then Sarah, you'd be in Denver.
Right?
Right? What is Denver? Denver's absolute proof that the settlers gave up.
Oh, jeez, harsh.
You know, so if you think about it, it's quality of life. You know, this was a huge rainstorm today. Absolutely devastating. It shut us down for 25 minutes. You know, we needed the water. There's no question about it. We are, and I just have to repeat it. I have a friend of mine who's the #1 real estate agent in Coronado. Anybody been to Coronado? He sent me a message. He says he's a Texan. He came to Texas from Coronado, or from Texas to Coronado. He's been there a long time. He sent me a message about how God loves Texas, right? And I heard it all, and I listened to it, and you know, Texans are really fond of Texas. Texans are the only people that are fond of Texas, right? The whole rest of the world, the whole rest of the world is fond of where you're sitting, you know. And so, will the interest rates stop people from making a higher income, which this is the biggest and best place on earth to advance yourself if you're young? So it won't stop that. Will it stop aching bones that just can't live in Denver anymore because of age? Won't stop that. So what's going to happen? What does happen is that interest rates have a bigger short-term effect on the California real estate market than any other place in the country. Why? Because we pay a higher amount of our income for a loan than any place else. So we put more into housing than any place else. We also, when we sell, get more out of housing than any place else. So interest rates have slowed the market down pretty dramatically. But let me ask you a question. Are people not selling or buying because of interest rates? Are they not selling or buying because they want to have the perfect opportunity and they're not sure that it's there? It really is that. Because a 5% interest rate is affordable. The other thing I think that Russ can talk about that's just clear is that at least in the California market, there's a massive amount of inherited money that's come into the market and will continue to come into the market. Because more people today are my age or older than ever before. We were successful people, and what are we doing with that money, really?
You're not going anywhere, are you?
Yeah, no. But we're turning it over to our children. And so I see people all the time coming out to buy properties with 50, 60, 70% down. You know, 70% down on a $2.5 million house. So there's a massive amount of cash looking for a place to go. And what better place in a questionable, inflation-driven market than to put it into a house? Because the long-term security of it is quite significant.
Well, I agree.
That eliminates your problem with the interest rate.
Absolute. Cash takes care of interest rates. There's no
Well, if
question
you look
about
at
it.
real estate as an investment, though, when you really pencil it out, like if I had $100,000 and I wanted to put it in the stock market, what's a great rate of return in the stock market?
Pretty typical.
According to Bernie Madoff,
We had 20% for a couple of years there.
But let's just say it's 10, right?
Yeah.
Even in a market like this, let's say you get 10. 10% of 100,000 is, in 1 year, I earned $10,000. If I took that $100,000 and I put 10% down on $1 million home, right? And that's where I get to live, and it only goes up 3% in a year. My $10,000 or my $100,000 turned into 30. So if you look at real estate as an investment and the leveraging you can get with the fixed rate mortgage behind it, which does potentially have some deductibility for you as well. I mean, really, I am a believer, and I know you are too, that there is no greater builder of wealth in America than owning a home. Period, end of story. It's not necessarily, I'm not saying you don't put your money through 401ks into the stock market and things like that, but you really have to look at your home as an investment as well.
And rental properties.
And rental properties,
Yeah.
for sure.
very much so. So what's a good set of circumstances to buy a house? If I'm looking to buy a house, I'm going to suggest to you, first of all, that a little less emotion and a little more logic would be a really good thing. Now, I've been selling houses to people, and my people have been selling people houses for 50 years. And if you want to go out and buy an investment, take your emotion out of that investment. Say to yourself, look, I can afford to live in a house that I don't like so much for a couple of years, right? If it's a better investment than the house that I love and I'm going to overpay for it, right? So you can make a house lovable. You know, it's hard to make an apartment lovable, and part of that is because every time you hang something on a wall of an apartment, you feel like you're not home.
You're borrowing.
You're borrowing it. It's temporary. When you hang something on the wall of your house, or you make a change, or you fix something, it feels like you're fixing it on a permanent basis, and it's your choice, and you're not wasting your money. So my suggestion is that if you can buy something today, and you can buy it because it's had a 5 or a 6 or a 7% drop in value, could it have had more? So if the market has dropped 4, 5, or 6%, could there be houses out there that are selling that have dropped 12%? Why would that happen? Why would somebody in a 7% down market let something go for 12% less than they paid for it? Anybody got an idea?
Circumstances.
Thank you, Russ. Circumstance. Because I have to sell. Right? So there's have to sell people in the market all the time. There are people who have to move to Denver. Right? There are people who have to go to Texas, and there are people who have to go to Arkansas. You know, it's going to happen. So things are going to continue to sell. Looking at that opportunity, there's another huge change happening in the market right now that it is going to worry some people, but it's going to change the market forever, and it certainly changes the investment opportunity, and that's called an ADU, right? And I believe that today's opportunity to buy a property that ultimately will be zoned so that it can have an ADU is the best opportunity in years.
And that's an accessory dwelling unit.
Absolutely the
unit to
best
a property.
opportunity in years.
Passive income.
Yeah, because people are concerned right now. Some people have to sell. There's no question about it. Their mortgages is too high for them. They overextended themselves. They're moving to Denver, whatever that is. But if you can tie that together with a piece of property that may be able to have an additional unit put on it, it's absolutely zero to worry about the interest rate, because just the ability to add a property to an already existing lot or dwelling location is such a fabulous opportunity. It's unbelievable. So that's one of the circumstances that I would suggest to you. The other thing, if you have a home, and because I get people, oh, look depressed, will you, Russ? Now, come on, look really depressed.
That's about as depressed as I get.
You know, by the way, I'm watching you guys because in speaking, you have to watch your audience. How many of you have had children? All right, well, if you haven't had children, you're going to at some point look out, because they have a look that maybe you haven't seen. I'm going to show it to you real quick. How many of you have ever seen the act fascinated look? All right, the act fascinated look looks like this. Give me a second, I got to put it on. Here, the act fascinated look looks like this. That's what my daughter looks at me like when I talk to her about sex.
Oh,
When I talk to her about her grades. They can look at you like that for hours. The act fascinated look. So let me tell you, if you are looking at someone and they give you that look, it's over. So I'm watching for that, just in case you guys want me to end this conversation. But let me be perfectly clear that some of the circumstances I'm going to talk about may not be your circumstance, but you might know somebody whose circumstance it is. So let's just say that we have somebody put their property on the market, and they felt in this rush to buy that they were going to get $1 million for it, right? Today they're probably going to get 950, right? Because it's a nice house, it's a beautiful piece of property. They've done everything right about it. They're going to lose 5% of the value of the piece of property, right? If they're going to buy a $2 million house, and that's the reason for selling, is this market an advantage to them? Mm-hmm. So absolutely, there's no question. if you're going to lose 5% on $1 million house, and you're going to be able to gain 5% on the purchase of a $2 million house, you made a massive amount of money just by making the change. So that's circumstance. Russ, does that make sense to you?
100%.
No question about it. And that amount of money that you can make then gets topped together with it. The circumstance is that the person that's selling is not just giving up the 5% that the market's demanding, but they're giving up the 7% that they need to give up because you're a tough negotiator and you have a great realtor, right? If you're getting a real deal and you're buying on the right day, you can get a spread as much as 7 or 8% by just simply not hanging on to your house that you've got to give up 5% of the equity for. So you got to watch circumstance again. Is that right, Russ?
Absolutely.
So today, if you can buy a house for 10% less, right, than you could buy it a year and a half ago because of that spread, circumstance of why they have to move, and the market itself. If you can buy a house for 10% less, and you have now flexible mortgages, even though they're at 5% or 6%, even though they have that kind of number attached to them, what's the possibilities that they're going to be able to be refinanced? In the old days, you couldn't just do a refinance. There was a thing called a prepayment penalty. And some of those prepayment penalties dragged out as much as 5 years. So once you were into a mortgage, you were stuck with that mortgage. Today, if you finance on a shorter term with possibly even interest only, you can buy the property, and the moment that the market declines, you can refinance at almost no fees whatsoever. Now, there's a trick in refinancing that I want you to be aware of, and Russ can comment on it. But they're gonna say in refinancing that you only have these fees attached. Of course, every time you refinance, the amount of time you've been paying on the loan goes away. So because of the rule of nines or whatever they
You're
call it.
re-amortizing.
Yeah, you're re-amortizing it. So there's another cost associated. But how much is a typical property going to appreciate this year, Russ, in San Diego?
Let's just say 4%, 3 or 4%.
3 or 4%, right? Well, 3 or 4% leveraged on your $1 million instead of the $100,000 that you had to put into the stock market, that it only made that increase in value on the $100,000. Instead, you've got the leverage of making it on $1 million.
Which, by the way, this year, stock market went backwards.
It did.
Housing did
Oh,
not.
it's a beauty, wasn't it?
Mhm.
Yeah, yeah, it was ugly.
What do you think about inventory and supply and demand?
Well, there's
Somebody just died.
It's a pillow.
There's a couple of things about inventory. It's extremely low. That's why I said earlier, maybe you buy a house that has the features that you want, that you can afford to buy based on the interest rates today, and you buy it with the expectation that you'll be able to add some of those features in the future. So when you refinance, right, you're then able to make the modification to the house or build the ADU or any of those sorts of things. So look for opportunity out there in the marketplace. It's abounding. There are people that are just absolutely 100% making deals that a year ago they would not have even possibly considered.
And what about seller concessions?
I think that again, the reason I gave the key word of circumstance is because there are sellers that don't need to sell. Okay, so you don't have to worry about that because you can't buy their house anyway, right? That you're not going to go out and buy a house from somebody who doesn't need to sell it. It's the wrong market for that. Who do you need to find in this market? You need to find the person who's going to sell. That's why the inventory is even more limited than it appears to be, because there's lots of. I'm going to give you a message that you might remember. Buyers that buy, and buyers that don't buy, right? sellers that sell, and sellers that don't sell, don't sell. So there's people who just like, or they hate themselves and they just like to keep their property on the market forever. Right? Did anybody ever know anybody like that? I know you have. So all of us in the business have.
Karen Vivica
There's-
had a neighbor.
There's lots of properties out there.
You still have that neighbor.
There's lots of properties out there that aren't going to sell.
That guy
You
does
don't
not
want
want
to
to
look for one
sell.
of those if you're a buyer.
And that's not real inventory at that point.
That's correct. So the inventory is much smaller than it appears.
And I think a normal marketplace is like 5 or 6 months. I think I heard it's about 1 month or 1.5 months of inventory today in San Diego County. And then we have the factor of demographics that's also killing the supply and demand factor, right? So if I have X amount of new households that are being formed every year, which currently is at 1.3 million, by the way, in the United States, normally it's 1.7. But you had in a new household is my child's moved out of the house and is going to go buy their own home, or a couple gets divorced and one of them now is going to go into a different house. You formed another household, right? So normally that's 1.7. Builders have really tapped the brakes on what they're building. If you take the 1.3 number, we have in the United States about 100,000 homes every year that are destroyed or condemned or whatever that have to be rebuilt. So that leaves it at 1.2 that builders are currently putting on the market that's available. Yet you have 1.3 million in people that are new household formations. And the only reason it's 1.3 is that because interest rates were a little bit higher and a little uncertainty with inflation and things like that, it's probably going to go to that 1.7 number again, which means supply is going to be an issue.
How many households do we have in the United States?
Total households? That's a good question. I do not know the answer to that.
Okay.
I'm just looking at household formation, how many more come online
Right.
versus how many new homes we're building, right? Because the market that we're talking about, which is how many homes are for sale here, those are already built, they're stagnant, right? We aren't talking new construction there. Overall in the nation, if you're only putting 1.3 million houses out and 100,000 of them are houses that have to be reoccupied because you tore one down or it burned down, some disaster took it out, you aren't building enough homes, right? And in San Diego County, we certainly know that's to be true because you don't have the land to build a lot of homes.
They don't want you to either.
And it's a little more difficult.
But that's the key to what's happening in the market right now. There's a government. We have a California government that wants to build affordable housing, wants to put people into houses instead of having them have to rent and pay extremely high rent. Now, I'm much more of a conservative. I'm not a person who would vote for what the government is doing today, but I live in the world that they create my circumstance. And so my circumstance is that I think you're going to see a lot of commercial real estate, right, over this next 2 or 3 years converted to living units. Tremendous amount of that's going to happen.
Interesting.
You're going to see all kinds of density created in marketplaces that otherwise had no residential property in them at all. You're going to see the ultimate next home being created by it being put on a property that's 2 or 3 or 1.5 acres and has enough room for another ADU. So there's going to be a lot of property coming on the market that is going to subsidize absolutely very little new homes being built because it's too expensive to do. To start from scratch with a piece of dirt with no power, no water, all of that stuff is so expensive today that it's incredible.
I think you're going to see a lot of office space, traditional office space
Converted.
that are converted into apartment units. I think we're already seeing it in Mission Valley.
Yeah, I think that's a place where there's going to be huge money made, tremendous amount of money made by those who can afford to. Buying a single family home that's dilapidated and needs to be revived has been something that the flippers have been doing for quite some time. Now they're only going to do it. It's only going to make sense if it can add another unit on the property. Yeah. So with kind of where our heads are, can you guys stimulate a few questions and you can be included in this, Mary Beth, that we can answer to kind of stay more on track of what your minds are thinking as opposed to what we're talking about.
Well, you've been talking, oh, go ahead.
Go ahead.
I, as an individual, am thinking of downsizing. I have a large house and I'm thinking of downsizing. And my hesitation is, if I sell my house, where do I go? What is available for me? And I'm not gonna downsize and move like way down. I wanna kind of make a lateral move, less square footage. But I'm stagnant because I'm like, there's nothing out there for me.
Well, I think you have to find it, right? So
I've been
you
looking.
can't find it till you look, and then once you find it, then it's a matter of, okay, I strike now, I have to get that home purchased, and then we figure out, okay, how can we have both? Maybe you have the ability to have both, maybe you don't, maybe we can do a bridge loan in between, while you're listing your home for sale and moving out of it and staging it and doing all those things.
Because I'm worried about inventory, like you guys were talking. There's not a whole lot out there.
No, and I think you have to be a little patient, right? Especially if you're in a home
Yeah.
already, you're not depreciating, or at least it doesn't
There's
feel
no
like it
urgency.
is. But then it's finding the house that you want
Yeah.
at that point.
Okay.
How is the market if you want to buy something like a multifamily house or some rental, something you can rent out? How is that market today in
Well,
San Diego area?
So multifamily, meaning apartment buildings, 20 units plus, those
No.
are super hot if you're talking residential 1 to 4, 1 to 5. You just have to go out and hunt like any other. Steve's right. And MaryBeth mentioned this thing called seller concessions. We are seeing more and more of that. Sellers who have to sell for whatever reason, they want to get out of California, they want more cash, they want to reinvest their money, they're moving, whatever it is. When they need to sell, they are doing concessions, and it's not just in price. We can do things like get a 6% credit to closing costs and drive if you're buying a multi-unit property, drive that interest rate way down where you're getting good cash flow out of it.
Right. And as far as rents, the rents have gone up substantially and vacancies have gone down substantially. So purchasing an investment property in San Diego is an absolute winner.
Quick question for you. On a 30-year fixed rate mortgage, how often does your payment change?
Never.
Never. Rent, how often does your rent change?
Every year.
Every year. What's the percentage they can go up?
Is it 6?
No.
It depends on the
On where.
actual property
Right.
and how long it's been rented.
Right.
So
I
it
think
depends
there's
on
some
the
that can
property.
go up 10%.
You're allowed 10.
10, yep.
I think it's critical to understand though that if you look at that graph, right?
The straight line one?
Yeah, the straight line one that's going up or going down. Let's just say this is going down. And right now the market has dropped a little bit. There are people that are selling the house right now that are selling their house for way below what the graph would indicate because of circumstance. So when you're trying to buy, you want to make sure that you can take advantage of the person while there is that low opportunity, even if your current home, right, is not if it's not the moment to sell it, it still might be the moment to buy another house. So
Right.
you gotta watch what's happening in the market, and you always have to be smart. The passion behind buying, right, from my perspective, has always been tied to trying to get the exact thing. If I look back at the people that I sold properties to over the years, a lot of people bought compromises that they ended up building into what they wanted or parlaying the money into their next house. So there's so much of this. If I don't have this set of conditions, I won't buy it. I told a young man one time, I showed him out, goes all the way back to my beginnings. I showed him a house. He was a veteran. He was still active duty. I showed him a house for $24,000, and the door of the house opened out. Well, the reason it opened out was because it was 600 square feet, right? The whole house, it gave him more room, right? I walked he and his wife into the house, and he looked at it and said, I said, what do you think? And they said, we hate it. We just hate it. And I said, well, let's go ahead and go write it up. Let's go ahead and buy this one. He said, well, we just told you we hated it. And I looked at him and said, if you don't buy this house today, John, you will never, based on your income that is now predictable for the next 15 years, you'll never buy a house. This is your only chance. So you kind of have to look at your, they bought the house for $24,000. I sold it to them for 4 years later for $155,000.
Wow.
Right? Those are the stories that created income. I sold a house in Arcadia. Arcadia is a nice suburb of Los Angeles. I sold a house in Arcadia to a client for $64,000. Right? It had 2 apartments on it. Arcadia was zoned so you could have what is now going to become an ADU. Right? Had 2 apartments on it. They got a VA loan. Right? They bought the house. They lived in it for 27 years. They never made a single dollar of investment in it because the 2 units paid the mortgage during the entire time they lived there, and they retired when they sold the property for $1,800,000. So you have to start looking more long term. Even if you're old like me, you can look long term into what the result of buying today does for your family. And so the opportunity is always better when people are more frightened of doing it. It's that simple. And the best of the best are gonna buy something, and when you do, you just have to realize that it might not be your perfect circumstance. But today, the amount of time that people live in their individual properties has increased dramatically. It used to be that people in California at one time were moving every 3.5 years. Today, there's no supply, so people are moving 7 to 15 years. Questions?
So you're talking about circumstances, and I think a huge one are people who are renting and maybe looking at becoming a first-time home buyer, and they're fearful because they've only been looking recently and they've seen 3% interest rates, and now they're 6 or 6.5, whatever they are, and they think they can't afford it. And so they're going to delay and wait. But what happens?
Well,
They're paying 100% interest on their current situation because it's all interest.
what you can't,
rent.
what you can't do is buy what you can't afford.
Correct.
And so the interest rate is not the problem as long as you can afford to pay it.
Mm-hmm.
And interest rate is a terrible thing if you take on an interest rate that you can't afford the payment. But the government doesn't even let the lenders don't even let you do that any longer. That's what happened. In what year did we crash?
2008.
Yep.
2008. What happened when people were buying things that they couldn't afford to live in, right? If you have an income, if it's stable, and the interest rate is 5% or 6%, it makes sense to buy. If you can't afford to buy with a 5 or 6% interest rate, then you can't afford to buy.
Well, and I think that's one of the
But buy
reasons.
less. Don't not buy less.
And that's one of the reasons you aren't going to see a housing crash, by the way.
Right.
Before, the reason why we had the housing crash, it was faulty underwriting. Right? They didn't really even have underwriting, if you think about it. The vintage of loans that have been done the last 8 to 10 years, their full income documentation, barring mass job losses where no one can make payments, you aren't going to see that type of market crash. If we were to have had a market crash, it would have been during COVID, and we had the opposite.
And the percentage of people with more than 40% equity in their home
It's never been higher.
in the United States has never been higher. 40% equity.
Or the percentage of people that own their home outright without any mortgage.
Yeah, right.
Mm-hmm.
But we do hear all the time, is the market crashing? Is the market crashing? The sky is falling because of the headlines.
Yeah, they make it look like it's another 2008 happening all over again, and it's not even similar.
It's not. Back to the first-time home buyer, I mean, I've been in this industry since 1990 doing home loans, right? A long time, and I've seen the ups and downs. I can tell you the product that is available out right now wasn't here 2 years ago, The product that's available right now for first-time home buyers has never been better. I mean, you can get in literally with no money down, a grant of 3.5% in San Diego. So,
But then you have to have a PMI,
yes, you'll have mortgage insurance, sure.
which means you can't refinance for 5 years, right?
No. Don't do that. No, actually,
Glad you
good
asked
question.
that.
I'm very glad you asked that because you can, when you do like an FHA loan, right? You can do an FHA streamline loan after you've had that loan 210 days, and the mortgage insurance stays in place, and you just do basically a rate reduction. So you can refinance up to actually 95% loan to value cash out on an FHA, and you have mortgage insurance. I think what you're thinking of is that the mortgage insurance will automatically drop off because of amortization. You've made payments and it's dropped down, but you can always refinance. Back in the day, as you were saying, you had prepayment penalties. So if I have to pay this big penalty, it's not advantageous to refinance, but they've done away with those with new
But you can,
legislation.
if you refinance, you can get rid of your PMI within a year.
Yeah, absolutely. As long as your equity's there,
Yeah,
right? If there's
of course.
good equity in it,
Yeah.
or we restructure it, you can do a first and a second, right, to get rid of the mortgage insurance, so you're only at 80% loan to value on the first. Yeah, there's a lot of different ways to do that. And mortgage insurance really isn't a bad thing. It's there to insure. A very interesting thing, if you look at it, a loan with 19% down has a more favorable rate than a loan with 20% down.
Huh,
Why do you think that is?
because it's insured.
Because it's insured, it has mortgage insurance on it.
Interesting, okay.
Really?
Huh.
You get a better fee rate structure at 19% down, something with mortgage insurance, than you do without mortgage insurance at 20% down.
Okay.
But then you
So you
pay
just pay off
more
that
I was
extra
just gonna
percent.
say, once
For
you-
the consumer,
Yeah.
right? Well, I've got that mortgage insurance
Yeah.
payment that
Yeah.
I'm contending with at that point. But that just tells you the mentality of when loans are being sold. And keep in mind, when I do a loan for someone, that's an investment on the lender's part. They're doing an investment. They're getting a return on their money. So the more risk there is there, the more they're going to charge for it.
Uh-huh.
So why not
So how much
get
is-
the 19% loan then, or you know, the down payment, and then 3 months later pay the extra percent off, so you're over the 20% threshold?
You can. Many investors will have it written in, or you get 75% loan to value for it to automatically drop off, right? So you'd have to do a larger principal reduction, but you could do that.
Okay.
Per, did you have a question?
Yes, the PMI that you pay, the interest charge,
Mhm.
how much is that if you compare that to the mortgage rate? I mean, how much
It depends.
extra?
It's a percentage of the loan amount, right? And rough estimate, 0.25%
Okay,
in payment.
Okay.
So it's not astronomical. Again, it's a risk factor. So as a mortgage insurance company, just like if I'm an auto insurance company, if I'm doing auto insurance for someone that's been a driver for a very long period of time, they've never had a ticket, they're driving a safe car that doesn't go super fast, my premium's going to be less than someone who is 16 years old and driving a Ferrari and has horrible grades or something like that, and a bunch
Who
of
are
traffic
his
tickets.
parents?
I don't know, but you get what I'm saying, right? It's a matter of risk.
Right.
No cost.
So the riskier that loan is, the more the mortgage insurance is
So
going to be.
there's an inversion that happened, there's another thing that happened that I think is at least interesting. As a buyer or a seller, you should be aware of this. If I were gonna draw you a map of a subdivision, and the subdivision was bordered by the sewer treatment plant on one side, and a main road on the other, and a beautiful park on one side, what happened as the market kept going up and up, and the inventory went down, and the rates were the lowest they were ever being, people were trying to buy things, and they were turned down on buying the first house they made an offer on, the second house they made an offer on, the third house. And what actually happened was, it used to be that a neighborhood, if you were next to the sewer treatment plant, your house was worth less than it was if you were looking at the park. In the last couple of years, what happened is all the houses in the same neighborhood all had the same value. So everybody overpaid for the house that wasn't on the park. Right? So when you see the values coming down, it's really just a reflection of the fact that somebody overpaid for the house on the sewer treatment plant. And the net result of that is that today, the person that's going to be hurt the worst is the person who bought the house on the sewer treatment plant because they had to get into that community for their children to go to that school. So there's all kinds of mismatched values, and you have to just get a good realtor, and we have them here in the room. You need to get a good realtor to make sure that that adjustment is being done, and the opportunity could be better. You know, some people just are driven completely nuts by any noise whatsoever. You know, I don't know if you're one of those, but you were talking about looking at houses in the dark, right? Turning all the lights out. I have had clients who literally had to sleep in the house, right,
wow.
before they would make an offer because they were so sound sensitive.
Huh.
So remember, one person's Achilles heel is somebody else's opportunity.
Just so you know, our broker just had a stroke on that statement.
Yeah.
Do not let anybody stay in a house overnight.
Yeah. No, it was really funny. The
Tent in the front yard.
yeah, the person he bought the house after his wife slept in it for 2 nights.
That's crazy.
2 nights.
Yeah.
2 nights.
Really.
Squatter's
and
rights.
that was a hard job for me to convince somebody that we could do that, right?
It's interesting. You
They
said
could live on
something
our
that-
street. It's-
What's that?
They could live on our street because
Yeah.
it's very quiet.
You said something that caught my attention. You said the person that'll get hurt is the person that bought the home next to the sewage plant, only if they have to sell it.
Right.
That's correct. That's
Because
correct.
the values are still going to go up no matter what. I mean,
Yeah.
unless there's a
It's not that they
huge
bought the
catastrophe.
house next to the sewer treatment plant, because if they bought it at the right price, right, it might be a tremendous advantage. The problem with it is that everything leveled out and everything was selling for more than it may have been worth.
Right.
So the person, I believe that the market has not declined, as you read in the newspaper, for the person who has the perfect house. I still think it's the perfect house. And so with that said, prices can still be optimized. There's no question about that.
Well, and then their neighbor sold their house for $75,000 more than it was worth during the pandemic because the demand was so high, and it didn't get listed at that price, but it sold for that price, and now they want that price, even though the market's changed, interest rates have gone up, they want their neighbor's price, and so they list it at that, or they won't list it, and then they have to come back down on the price, and that's what the news picks up and says, oh, look,
Price
prices are
reduction.
declining in
And
value.
Yep.
Let me make sure that circumstance again comes into the fact that there is never a circumstance that we should advise you as sellers ever to put your property on the market in the hopes that you'll get more than we know you can get.
Yep.
Right? Nothing is more devastating than an overpriced house. Overpriced houses fall through themselves. So if you put the property on the market too high and you start to lower it, does anybody remember the San Diego Chargers? All right? There was a wannabe football team that was in San Diego for years called the Chargers. And one of my clients owned the Chargers. Right? And he passed away, and I should have put his house on the market in Rancho Santa Fe. He was my friend. He was a person that he had told his estate, you need to list your property with Steve. I went to list the property, and I told the people that the property was worth, the estate, I told them that it was worth $9 million, right? That his house was worth $9 million. The next realtor in told them that it was worth 14. Right? So they blew me off and put the property on the market at 14 million. Right? It was on the market continuously through 7 real estate brokers for 7.5 years.
Jeez.
Right? It went from being listed at 14 million to my selling it for 3.5.
Whoa.
Hey.
right? It was worth double that, but why did it sell at 3.5? It sold at 3.5 because nobody wanted to buy something that no one else in the world wanted.
Yep.
So it fell through itself. You have to be looking for properties that have been on the market too long, right? If they've been on the market too long and the circumstances that they need to sell, that's when the biggest opportunity. But you have to take your heart out of that. You have to say, look, I'm going to buy it because it's really an investment and I can live in it for a while, but I don't have to have the perfect house. So a lot of different considerations in this whole thing. One more question. Somebody, give me a question. The man in the blue coat. He just sits there and he says, I can see him. He doesn't act fascinated though. He looks like he's paying attention. So.
I mean, just a reflection.
What's that?
Just a reflection. I mean, you were talking about the location next to the sewage plant.
Yeah.
If you have a good realtor, a realtor will tell you, no matter which market you're in, whether it's a good market or bad market, that if you must sell at a time when the market is not good, you're going to have a hard time selling this, which is next to the sewage plant. It's going to take a longer time, or you have to go down in price. And I mean, that's why you have a realtor also, that will be honest with you from the beginning and play the devil's advocate.
Yeah, I sold a lot of property. I sold lots for people to build things on, and I went out with my boss one time and we priced all of the lots. And I was standing on the lot and I said, Gene, I think we put a price too high on this. It's very noisy, right? And he looked at me and said, huh? So there is somebody who can't hear, right? But it still doesn't really affect the value. The house with problems is always a house with problems. But as I think Russ was saying, they're still going up exponentially in value. And so if the only house that you can buy is the one next to the sewer treatment plant, just make sure you buy it at the right price, right? Because it's still going to appreciate at the same level.
Bought it for less, you'll sell it for less.
I'm a huge believer in there's people in this room young enough to absolutely make a fortune by buying the house they don't really like, right? I think if I had looked back and I hadn't just optimized every dollar that I made and bought everything that I could buy, if I would have bought some fixers and I would have taken the time to not have to have it perfect, I would have made a lot more money in the real estate market over years. So if there is a fixer that you can buy right now, and the circumstances that the person needs to sell, it's the best opportunity that you can possibly have.
Well, there's nothing better than passive income.
That's
right?
correct.
Having rental property.
Yeah.
You make money when you sleep with passive income.
Yeah. And what today might be marginal, you're just barely getting back the mortgage payment in terms of a rental property. If it's appreciating at 0.5% a month, right? It doesn't take more than 2 or 3 years to just have been a genius in having bought it.
Right.
And the rents will continue to go up, so
Yeah.
what's marginal now is pretty darn
I think
good.
there's another thing that at least we should look at. When they talk about a 4 or 5% increase in value per year, we're talking about a national statistic.
Correct. Well, it's not
You know,
California.
do you know how much property went up in Encinitas?
Yeah.
17, 18, 20% in a year. So California continues to lead the market in terms of financial growth. The other thing that I'd like to make clear to you is that it used to be that San Diego was a niche market, right? And people didn't come here. It was a sailor town. It was a military town. It didn't have enough engine to drive the economy. People after COVID we are just beginning to see the effects of a worldwide economy and the opportunity for people to live anywhere in the world they want to live. And more people are coming from Los Angeles, San Francisco, Seattle, Vancouver, all of those places where no one came here are now all taking a look at San Diego as an opportunity. So our value is going to continue to go up. I think it would be hard with good advice from a good realtor to buy a house today and expect to lose money. Right? I think it is just almost be impossible, because the world has actually looked at San Diego County today because of technology and the fact that technology is coming to San Diego. I think there's just opportunity that abounds.
So what about mortgages on rental properties?
Mhm.
Can you get the same kind of deal as you do for your primary residence?
Little
or-
bit higher rate. One of the things that a lot of investors look at is doing something like an interest-only loan, because you're buying not necessarily to pay your mortgage off quickly, you're buying for cash flow,
Right.
right? Because that increases your rate of return. So looking at that helps. Typically, depending on down payment, credit, things like that, you're looking at about a 0.5% higher. Not a tremendous amount.
It's a
0.5%
skosh,
in
it
rate.
almost is.
And that's 4 units and under. Once you hit 5 units and above, it becomes a commercial loan, and that's a whole different ballgame.
Right.
Can be. But you can still get 30-year fixed. You can actually get a 40-year fixed.
I have one of
And
those.
Sarah, in addition to that, with rental property, you get to deduct everything. There's some limits right now on how much your mortgage interest you can deduct if you have a big mortgage.
Mhm.
But with
That's
rental
right.
properties, it's all deductible, all the taxes, all the interest, all the repairs, everything.
When you have the depreciation, that's also sheltering your cash flow income.
Yep.
And is that 27.5 years?
27.5 of structure value, not land.
Right.
And the best part of an investment property is somebody else is paying the mortgage, not you.
Right. And then one thing, this is kind of off topic, but I want to make sure everybody in this room knows, is make sure you call your homeowner's insurance person and find out what your replacement value is, and make sure that your property insurance is up to speed and up to date. And you should do that every single year, because replacement costs have gone up astronomically, and you could be underinsured.
Good point.
That's my PSA for the day.
And even if it says replacement value, it isn't necessarily.
Right.
They still have limits, right?
Yeah, and you got all the new codes you have to pay for too. Because with your older house burns down and you get to build a new one, it's all new codes and it costs $30,000 to $50,000 more.
Thank you,
ADU
guys.
or a unit? If
The
you're
house,
gonna, if you're gonna
yeah.
buy a duplex,
Yeah, duplexes and fourplexes are the money.
Yeah.
terrific,
Yep.
absolutely terrific.
Not easy to find. And it's unemotional. Can't have any emotion in the game.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Good seeing you.
Thank you,
I'll
guys.
manage through this.
Right? I'm going to figure out how to end this.
Jesse.
Thank you, bud. Appreciate it.
Hi, guys. I'm
All
trying
right.
to figure